Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch. I'm Vikas Swarup, your host on this show, which helps you make better sense of the world by giving you in-depth analysis of foreign affairs from an Indian perspective. Every week, we bring you a new Diplomatic Dispatch focusing on something that is topical, current, and important from India's point of view. This week, our focus is on a small, narrow, semi-arid country on the southeastern coastline of the Mediterranean Sea, steeped in history and rich in human capital. This is the country India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has just visited. I'm talking about Israel, of course, and his visit provides us the perfect opportunity to take a deep dive into India's ties with that country. Relations between Indians and the Jewish people go back to more than 2 millennia. When the Roman emperors began persecuting Jews, many fled to India, where they have always found a welcoming home. It is no surprise that some of the oldest synagogues in the world are in Kerala and Mumbai. The Jewish community has enriched India's culture, but has been declining in numbers, with more than 70,000 migrating to Israel after its formation in 1948. During the First World War, Indian soldiers fought and laid down their lives to liberate the city of Haifa from the Ottomans in 1918, in what is considered the last great cavalry campaign in history. That is why Teen Murti Chowk in New Delhi was renamed as Teen Murti Haifa Chowk in the centenary year of the Battle for Haifa, as a symbol of friendship between India and Israel. But this relationship has had its ups and downs. Though India officially recognized Israel in 1950, it took us more than 40 years to establish full diplomatic ties, which finally happened on the 29th of January 1992. And then it took another 25 years for an Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel. That is why Prime Minister Modi's visit to Israel in July 2017 was historic and groundbreaking. It elevated India-Israel ties to the level of a strategic partnership and was followed 6 months later by an equally successful visit to India by the then Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu. Today, the two countries are collaborating in a whole range of sectors, from defense and security to space, healthcare, water conservation and agriculture, and nanotechnology. Trade and investment ties have also flourished, with bilateral trade going up from $200 million in 1992 to more than $4 billion in 2020. India is now Israel's third largest trading partner in Asia and seventh largest globally. But beyond diamonds and defense equipment, the two countries are now increasingly focused on expanding their knowledge-based partnership, which includes collaboration in innovation and research. To know more about all this, I am joined by two eminent guests who not only have intimate knowledge of the India-Israel relationship, but have personally contributed to it. Joining us in the studio is Ambassador Navtej Sarna. A veteran of the Indian Foreign Service, Ambassador Sarna was the longest-serving official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs. He was Secretary West at headquarters and ambassador to Israel, the United Kingdom, and the United States. He is also well known as a prolific columnist and the author of 9 books ranging from fiction to history. Welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch, Ambassador Sarna.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, particularly in one of your early shows.
Yes. And joining us from Israel via video link is Ambassador Daniel Carmon. Like Ambassador Sarna, he is also a veteran diplomat who actually served as a member of the Israeli delegation to the historic Camp David peace talks in 1978. He has served as the head of Mashav, Israel's Agency for International Cooperation, and was Israel's envoy to India and Sri Lanka between 2014 and 2018. Welcome to the show, Ambassador Carmon.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Swarup, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you and with the Diplomatic Dispatch audience, as well as great to touch base again with Ambassador Sarna. Hello to everyone. Namaste.
Let me begin with you, Ambassador Carmon. Our foreign minister has just completed a very successful visit to your country. What is the significance of Dr. Jaishankar's visit to Israel?
I had the privilege to accompany the big four bilateral visits of prime ministers and presidents between 2015 and 2018. But we've seen other visits also, and the way that those visits influence the day-to-day strengthening of relation is really unbelievable. I remember very well the visit of the Minister for External Affairs, Sushma Swaraj, the late Sushma Swaraj in Israel. I think you accompanied the visit, Ambassador Swarup, if I'm not mistaken. And we are seeing now the visit of Minister Jayshankar, who is one of the architects of the strengthening of relations. And I've seen it, I've witnessed it in Delhi. I would look at this visit as part and parcel of a continuous journey, which started, as you have so well said in your introduction, and dramatically upgraded in 2014. And if we look at the history of the relations, where were we 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago, and where we are now, I really believe that the day-to-day diplomatic work and the high-level visits are not only constructive and helpful, but are crucial to the way that the government, ministries and administrations in both countries align, prepare, and then implement what is talked about during the visit. So it's symbolism, but it's also very, very practical. And we were so happy to welcome Foreign Minister Jaishankar in our country.
Thank you, Ambassador Carmon. Indeed, how much the relationship has transformed in the last 30 years. Turning to you, Ambassador Sarna. In your long career as a diplomat, you have seen the evolution of India-Israel ties. From a time when Indian passports used to bear a stamp saying, not valid for travel to Israel, to a time when high-level visits are happening regularly, including the recent visit of External Affairs Minister Dr. Jayshankar. So tell me, what is it about Israel that makes it such an important partner for India? And what is the significance of the Indo-Israeli strategic partnership?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to agree with both you and Ambassador Carmon about how much the relationship has changed. You mentioned that kind of passport which said not valid for travel to Israel. When I joined the diplomatic service in 1980, that's the passport I had. And 28 years later, I was India's ambassador to Israel. So the world had changed by that time. And over the last 30 years, next year we complete 30 years of diplomatic relations, I think the relationship has really moved by leaps and bounds. And several aspects of it have made it a very meaningful strategic partnership for both countries. Of course, one of the areas which everybody talks about and it comes front and center is security and defense. And of course, that is true. Israel has been a critical partner for us in defense. It's been helpful to us in several crisis situations by supplying weaponry and being available to supply us readily and without too many questions asked. And now, we have got the most modern weaponry and technology from Israel, including the AWACS. I mean, I remember during my time walking into those AWACS as they were being fitted up for India and wondering, what are we doing here? And of course, there's counterterrorism, which is the other aspect of security, in which there is a convergence and there's been a tremendously useful partnership. I had the somber duty on December 1, 2009, to receive the bodies of the victims of the attack on the Chabad house in Mumbai in 2008, and then attend that funeral. And I saw at first hand the kind of cooperation and empathy there is between the two countries on counterterrorism. And besides these security and defense relations, there are other areas. Israel is like a very effective small lab which is producing the highest technologies. As you mentioned, it's very strong on human capital. And then India is this country which can absorb these technologies, which can give a scale to these technologies. So whether we are talking of artificial intelligence now, you're talking of cyber, you're talking of telecom, you're talking of S&T, R&D, health, all these things, we have had a very good relationship. There are traditional areas, of course. There is water. You know, we get delegations going from India from our deserts. You know, you get a Rajasthan delegation and then you get a Cherrapunji delegation because it's the issue of water management. And Israel has developed these technologies of desalination, of wastewater management, and many of those companies are now working in India. That's one more aspect. Agriculture, of course, you know, that old drip irrigation, but more than that now, horticulture. Israel has, I believe, 27 or 29 centers of excellence in India. And to top it all, I think the basis of the relationship is the warmth. You know, the Indian-Jewish connection, as you mentioned in your introduction, is very old, it's very strong. 70, 80,000 people have gone to Israel, but they've not gone out of discrimination. They've gone for religious fervor or for economic opportunities, but they've not gone out of discrimination, and they're perhaps the unique example of people who have gone to Israel without discrimination behind them. So that's a very important part. Plus, of course, almost every family has a person who's been to India or going to India. So that all builds up. This is this tremendous thing, and also the soldiers and all that. We can talk at length, but I won't stop you from going ahead with your conversation.
Ambassador Carmon, you just heard Ambassador Sarna talk about the importance of Israel for India. But I want to understand from you, what is India's importance for Israel?
Well, we could look at this in three different angles, probably. One is the global changes that we see, global and regional changes, and how can India, from our perspective, of course, be incorporated or fit into something that is happening in our region. And we have seen the Abraham Accords and the real, I would say, strategic earthquake that we have witnessed in the last year. We could also look at the fact that, and I'm quoting our prime ministers saying that when the Indian prime minister is looking west, he sees only one democracy. When the Israeli prime minister is looking east, he sees also one democracy, and those two democracies, the shared values, the shared interest, the shared language. We speak the same language, and I'm not talking about English only. When looking at the strategy of being stable participants and stable players in our own region, and the contribution that we all have to a bigger and larger stability, letting our peoples, occupy themselves with real things that should be the preferences of people, which is the well-being and the livelihood and the development and the industrialization, etc. So I would say that this is one aspect of it. And another aspect, of course, from the Israeli point of view, is the importance of India as a power in the international arena. And as you know, Israel is not being always very well treated in the international arena because of the previous, I would say, politics, Middle Eastern politics, and India strengthening relations with Israel and showing that you could do business with Israel, you could do you can have good relations with Israel without interfering with other policies and making the distancing one from another. I think that India can serve as a model to other countries in the world, and I think we start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in this respect. Israel has not looked east early enough, and I think that part of our relations with India is looking east. I think that we neglected in the past for various reasons. Again, global reasons, this is an important aspect of it and very well received by India. So there was a change in the Indian policy for various reasons. I'm not sure we want to go into them now, and a change in our looking at Asia. But something that is very, very important, which is not on the bilateral and not on the global scene, is the people-to-people aspect. When you go and you walk in the streets of Israel today, and I think I've heard a hint from Ambassador Sarna in this, when you say the word India, every second person was in India, has a relative who was or is in India. The relationship on the people-to-people aspect, the academia, the visits, the tourism, the number of students in Israel, and the cultural aspect, all of those bring a very strong infrastructure to those relations.
Now we know that former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a big impetus to Israel's ties with India. He also shared a very public camaraderie with Prime Minister Modi. But since June this year, Israel has a new government and a new Prime Minister, Mr. Naftali Bennett. Can we expect the same attention to India under him?
Well, I'm reminded, I remember that a few weeks before the 2015 elections in Israel, a very prominent Indian leader asked me a similar question. And the question was, who will win the elections, which was a little difficult for me to answer. And the second one was, will the relations be endangered? And I, without thinking, I didn't even hesitate a minute, because I'm so sure and certain that while the Israeli politics is quite hectic, as you know, and complicated, but we have a different prime minister, and I can tell you without any hesitation that there is a huge consensus, both in government and at the people's level, that the relations with India are important, are sustainable, and there is no danger whatsoever to any change. On the contrary.
That's very reassuring indeed. Ambassador Sarna, defense cooperation has emerged as a major pillar of the strategic partnership. Today, Israel has become the second largest defense supplier for India, and India accounts for over 40% of Israel's defense exports. Even during Mr. Jaishankar's visit, India was participating in the multi-nation Blue Flag air combat exercise in Israel. But what next? Are we moving beyond the buyer-seller relationship?
I think we are. Because I think one thing that has marked our defense relations with Israel is a much greater trust and openness to share technologies, which we haven't seen always with all our partners. And now, if we can see newspaper reports sourced to our Ministry of Defense, which say that 9 Indian companies are signing 23 contracts with 4 Israeli vendors to produce things in India, co-development. So I think co-development, making use of the Make in India proposals, and buying into the tremendous opportunity. I think same reports talk about India planning 130 billion modernization of military over the next 7 years. So Israel has a lot to do, and they will be willing to do it, I think. So I think that really is the next step.
Ambassador Carmon, Israel is known as the startup nation, and several world-beating startups have come out of Israel. It has more than 50 unicorns, the most per capita in the world. India has also emerged as the 3rd largest startup ecosystem in the world. Can you tell us what are the main pillars of Israel's innovation economy, and how are India and Israel working together to combine their strengths in this very important sector?
There are similarities of young, curious, talented, eager to succeed entrepreneurs who really want to grasp the world with what we can offer in the fields of high-tech, health tech, fintech, agri-tech, water, which is water technology, and defense, which was mentioned before. If I may say a word about defense, when we started our relations in defense, it was really I would say, a pure buyer-seller relationship, and I think that we have grown up since then, and it's much deeper than just buying and selling. And if we talk about innovation in R&D is there also in the field of defense and homeland security and so many other areas. Now hundreds of partnerships are being explored in the field of innovation, and there have been some mechanisms that have been announced during the various visits that we have witnessed, including the Innovation Bridge, agreements and MOUs between iCreate in Gujarat and Startup Nation Central in Israel, some governmental, some semi-governmental, some companies that are not only bringing a product to sell, but also bringing the technology and sometimes the adaptation of the technology to the Indian world.
You also served as the head of Mashav. And in that capacity, I'm sure you played a very important role in the diffusion of Israel's precision agriculture to the rest of the world. So tell us, how is Israeli expertise and experience helping Indian farmers?
29 Mashav centers of excellence, which are a combination and a partnership between the Ministry of Agriculture in Delhi, the various states where those centers are located, established, and Mashav, which is the Israeli agency for international cooperation. In those centers, we bring our technology. India brings its infrastructure and the possibility to bring the people, the farmers, its training facilities, and eventually the idea is to change and have those training facilities change into farms that could also produce and sell the products to the neighborhood or to the region. Beyond the Mashav centers of excellence, on which we are very, very proud, there is so much that has been done, but so much to be done in the fields of water, both from the government point of view and the private sector. There is a pilot project in the UP, in Bundelkhand, which is thriving. Israeli irrigation companies are there, 3 big Israeli irrigation companies, which are part of projects, but also produce in India. Agriculture and water companies are very active. And my hope is, don't tell anyone, but my hope is that the water business will be so big between India and Israel with technology and with our experience in a while that it could equate agriculture and defense sometimes in the next, who knows, 10, 15 years.
My final question is for you, Ambassador Sarna. During his visit, Dr. Jaishankar also visited the Indian Hospice in Jerusalem. You have written a whole book on it, titled Indians at Herod's Gate, on the intriguing story of this age-old Indian presence in the heart of Old Jerusalem. What is the significance of this unique Indian connection to the Holy City?
I think the fact that there has been this connection goes into what you said, the old linkages, which are actually, very, very deep. And the Indian Hospice comes out as a wonderful example. And this is where Baba Sheikh Farid from Punjab actually went there in the 12th century AD and meditated there. And around his meditation, and there were several pilgrims who would go every year to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and stay in. And Old Jerusalem is full of hospices where pilgrims of all the religions, the Jewish religion, Islam, and Christianity, they used to go and stay and pray at the holy sites. So this is a wonderful institution which has grown over 8 centuries. It is now supported by the Ministry of External Affairs of the Indian government. It is run for the last 100 years. It was by an Indian sheikh who went from here and now by his family, his son, who is half Indian, half Palestinian, and his family, and they still carry Indian passports. So it's a great example of how deep the Indian connection is, and I'm so glad that we could actually find it. I mean, it was already there, but sort of bring it up into our public eye, and ministers are visiting it, and it's now fully repaired. And very interesting aspect of it is that during the Second World War, Indian soldiers used to go and live there as for rest and recreation, because unlike the First World War, during the Second World War, they didn't fight in that area, but they used to go and live there. So I think it's just one more pillar strengthening the India-Israel relationship.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing your insights and expertise with us on Diplomatic Dispatch. It is quite clear from your comments that the India-Israel partnership, to quote former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a match made in heaven, but you have also shown us how it is having a very beneficial impact on peoples of both countries here on earth. This is all I have for you tonight. Join me next week for another exciting episode of Diplomatic Dispatch. Till then, good evening and goodbye.